world of coaching evolving and the carousel always changing, we're going to sit down with some coaches and we're going to figure out what they coach, how they coach, and most importantly, why they got into this profession. My name is Kason Wilkinson, and I am your host of the Coach's Why podcast.
That's a great question.
That was my Coach's Why.
Welcome back to another Coach Why podcast, guys. We have a very special guest joining the show today, Coach Matt Stolz from the University of Queens, Charlotte. He's the head volleyball coach there. So, Coach, I appreciate you jumping on today and looking forward to this. So, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, absolutely excited for it.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I mean, volleyball. If you guys haven't ever watched a competitive volleyball set, it's really not even a game. It's outstanding. I've seen some crazy sets. Like I think I just saw a set not long ago pop up on my one of my reel feeds or something, and they were like, it was like a 90-point set. It was like 46 to 48 or some crazy high number, and that was just for one set. And I was like, holy smokes! So like the conditioning and just the mental focus is got to be crazy, especially when you go into those 2 points to win and you have to go that deep. It's impressive.
Yeah, I think that was a couple weeks ago. I think it was Ohio State and UCLA. So in men's, I think if I'm remembering correctly, and that is not normal for sure. So but yeah, in the men's game, it gets pretty gnarly with some of those scores because it's just so physical and powerful.
Yeah. Is there a difference between the two? I mean, obviously outside of like the gender, but like the play styles and maybe like the set pieces or just how you like the schematics of the game. Is there a difference between men's and women's?
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, I think you notice it more, when you compare men's and women's in general. I think the height of the net is already 8 inches higher. And so I think in general, the men's game is very built around power, and a lot of the time you'll see that in the top 15 in the women's game where, they have the athletes and the physicality that it really shapes into that. But generally for, D1, D2, NAI, a lot of those types of volleyball at this level, there is power, but it's a lot more of a rally and finesse. But the men's game at that level, it's bump, set, spike, and it's over. So a lot of teams will have really aggressive serving, because if you know that they're just going to be able to pound it, if you don't get a really good serve off, you start to see a lot more missed serves, and that part of volleyball can stink for the fan. But the level of power that those men and some of these women's teams and going into pro volleyball, it's pretty awesome. So super exciting game to watch for sure.
Yeah, and I know you just mentioned there's a pro side of it, right? And is that something that's kind of been around for a long time, or is that relatively new in terms of development?
Yeah. In the United States, it's definitely new, and that would be on the women's side. We have it's actually pretty crazy. I think there's about 3 or 4 leagues kind of trying to develop right now, and so it's going to be interesting over the next 5 years on who kind of outlasts the other one. But what's great about it, especially on the women's side, is there are a lot of opportunities coming, and traditionally there was opportunities over in Europe and other places, but there's a lot of Americans that are really good at volleyball, but, they want to start families and stay at home, which I totally get. They don't want to go over to, France and Italy all the time. So, there's a lot of opportunity domestically and internationally, which is, the growth of sports really cool to see.
Absolutely. The growth is always great. I coach women's wrestling, and so it's pretty cool to see the growth. I know obviously in your sport it looks like it's more on the professional side. For us, it's the college side. Obviously there's always been Olympics and stuff like that. For the women, maybe not always, but that's been kind of a established point in the women's wrestling. But the collegiate side of it and more opportunities is really cool to see. So I appreciate whenever you see some growth there and the evolving of the sport. So Absolutely. Well, let's kind of let's dive in a little about you. So I know you're at University of Queens, but tell me a little bit about yourself. So where did you grow up, and when did you get involved with sports, but maybe volleyball in particular, since that's what we're coaching.
Yeah, so originally from Wisconsin, grew up in the Milwaukee area for my entire life. Uh, I think I was always involved in sports, like probably since I was born. I don't know exactly when, a ball or a bat was put into my hand, but I gotta imagine it was pretty early on. And uh, my family is very big into sports, and so I think it was just ingrained into me from a young age. And funny story is my parents actually met at a volleyball open gym, and so I always joke maybe it was destined to be a volleyball player or coach. But um, it's an actually interesting story though. I really got into it probably around the age of like 11 or 12. And the reason was I had a sixth grade teacher that would give extra credit for anyone who would attend the boys' high school games because he was the coach. And, me being that kid that maybe didn't have the highest grade at the time was like, I probably should go check that out to get some extra credit. And you go there and you're like, oh my, like this is actually really cool. And at that time, the high school was packing out the gym, and I'm like, wait, this is really cool. And so then, it sparked that interest. And so, you started talking about like, how do I join? And there wasn't a lot of opportunities for 12-year-old guys in the state of Wisconsin at that point. And so, I started getting involved and started playing when I was about 12 to 13 years old, and honestly never looked back. I was playing other sports like basketball or baseball, and I quickly realized that I wasn't that good at those sports. And so I was like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what, I'm actually not bad at this volleyball thing, let's kind of stick with it. But it's actually funny, I still remember when I was in seventh grade, I was not paying attention in class, and I remember getting called out by my teacher, and I was just writing like volleyball rotations like a coach would. I was just practicing those suckers. And um I just fell in love with it so early. It's just the strategy behind it and all that. And so I never have looked back. I just fell in love with that sport and just craved it, man. It's an addicting feeling.
For sure, yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that you were in class, doing the set rotation and stuff like that. I actually remember uh, whenever I was probably in fourth or fifth grade, I made, I was playing football at the time, and I was making my own little like playbook. I was like, man, if I had my own, if I was a coach, this is what I'd do. I was making all this crazy thing. There's this thing called the swinging gate, which is where all the linemen except for the center and the quarterback are like here, and everybody else is on this side of the field. And like I didn't know that was a thing. I just like I think this would be legal. And so like I was making all these things up. And so long story short, I think it's cool whenever your mind kind of processes that. Obviously, it's different. Which I'm wrestled in college and did this stuff, but I never really, I did football too. But like I'm coaching wrestling, so I didn't really like do that whenever I was young. But it's just funny whenever you're in that time frame, like when you're addicted to something, your mind kind of just goes in that direction, and it's hard to get it off. So, or hard to get your mind off of that. And so, I think that you mentioned that was kind of funny. So, so you've been doing this since you were 12. So, it's interesting you say that because maybe it's because of where I grew up. I grew up in New Mexico, and so men's volleyball, I still don't know. If they even do men's volleyball. I know they don't do it for like a sanctioned sport there. So, but you said that you had that opportunity in Wisconsin, correct? Like you were able to do that there.
Yeah, so it's gotten a lot younger now that you can start with like club and AAU kind of starting earlier now. But when I was 13, I think I officially, or 12 or 13, I officially tried out for my first ever time, and was fortunate enough to make a team. And uh, there weren't many boys playing, and so we were often traveling down to Illinois or other states. So I think part of the reason why it is popular and it's always been popular up there is because unlike New Mexico, the weather can be kind of brutal with the snow.
Right.
And so, you know, there's a lot of indoor sports that have more opportunities probably traditionally in the North. Maybe that's changed now because, sports have just grown so much that maybe there are more opportunities. But I think at the time it really felt like the Midwest was really popular, like Illinois and Wisconsin, like I said, and then California. And then you would have random teams pop up here and there. Texas started being more popular, but it's really cool. And anytime, I'm sure you can agree with women's wrestling becoming more popular, it's cool anytime men's or women's volleyball or any other sport that you're involved with or you're passionate about is growing. So, it's been a cool ride and cool journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely is cool to see the growth of it and do that. And I think, on the men's side too, like I see it starting to gain a little bit more popularity as well, right, on the men's side. But I know we coach women, so you're kind of jumped into an established sport, which it is. It's been established for a long time in the women's side of things. And so, whenever you think about the coaching side of it, right? Because I know you spent some time as an assistant prior to here, which we'll get into as well here in a little bit. But, when did you decide that coaching, which it sounds like from an early age you were, making game plans and stuff like that. But when did you decide, like, man, this is what I want to do? I want to coach. And maybe that was in general, but, I guess probably more towards volleyball. When did you decide that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think I had some awesome opportunities when I was in high school to work at the rec department's like little kid league. And so that was my first, I guess, interaction with kind of helping out actually coaching some kids. And I thought it was fun. I think it's really beneficial for me and really awesome when I can see other people succeed and smile. Like, dude, that is, I know every coach will agree, like that is one of the best feelings, is when you actually help someone. And so I kind of got the itch when I was young, and I ended up going to a school north of me, where I was able to really play a lot of volleyball. And I love Lakeland, but Lakeland is really in the middle of nowhere. And what was cool about that is I could grind volleyball and grind my studies. And there is a local high school. Actually, there's a couple like local high schools, but there had been this history of men's players at Lakeland going to coach at this specific high school. And so, they were like, hey, there's going to be an opening for a JV coach. Would any of you guys be interested? And I'm like, you know what? It kind of sounds fun. I've never coached high school girls before, but like I'm really passionate about it. I've coached before. I'm a volleyball nerd probably, so I could probably figure this out. And it's actually really ironic. And as I'm telling the story, I remember this. The coach that I actually worked for, I actually saw this weekend as I was recruiting, and we were talking about what it was like back in 2014, and we still joke about how I worked for him, and now he's like, man, you're big time now. But yeah, it's pretty awesome. But I think one of the, and I'll tell you this, when I was maybe as a junior in college, I was doing an internship I was thinking about going into finance, and I sat behind a desk in a cubicle, and man, it wasn't for me. I like dressing up like for game days, but man, it was hard to sit behind a desk and just look at numbers and all of that. And we still do some of that, but I just didn't feel like it was my calling. And I was having so much fun coaching these girls, and man, I just got the itch. And so when I was probably as my junior year of college, I was like, dude, this is what you need to do. And I'm very fortunate to have a set of great parents that instilled in me from a young age that find something you're passionate about and then figure out how you can make money from it. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money, but figure out how to live, because if you're just living for a paycheck and just hating it, dude, you're gonna burn out super fast. And so honestly, I think my parents have instilled a great deal of who I am, just probably like everyone else. But I think like the constant feeling of like the passion has really pushed me to be who I am and where I'm at today.
I think that goes to show a lot. For one, shout out to your parents. They did a great job, it sounds like, in terms of helping you with your passion and you with the mentality, I should say, as well, reaching that. But it's funny you mentioned that, because I was with my oldest kid over a few days ago, actually, for the break, and so I was talking to him, and he pulled out we had Panda Express, and he had a fortune cookie, and it basically said, I can't remember word for word, but it basically said the same thing, like find your career that you can be satisfied with, basically, and so he didn't really understand that, but we explained it to him, and I was like, that's kind of what I did, dude. Like I realized that coaching is what I love to do, and I went and found the job that I wanted to do, right, which was to get to the college level. And so it's kind of cool that when you have the opportunity to do it, for one, and you realize it's what you want to do, how far it can take you if you have the passion and drive for it. But also when you realize, like, we all know coaches, unless you're probably, and I know every sport's different, but unless you're probably like, Alabama or some crazy high, SEC school or whatever the case is, we're not really doing it for money. And even then, they probably still don't get paid enough to handle what they have to go through, right? And so it's one of those things where, like you said, it might not be for a whole lot of money, but when you can wake up and enjoy what you do every day, it makes it all worth it. So I'd love that for sure. And you mentioned a coach that you had, I think you mentioned that was at the high school. That you just saw this last weekend or wherever you were at the recruiting thing, and so, or while you're out recruiting, I should say, whether it's this coach or different coach, you'll understand why I'm prefacing this, but whether it's that coach or another coach, who was influential to you and what did they teach you when it comes to whether it was a coach that you were under or maybe coached with, whatever the case is, but who was influential to you and what did they teach you?
Yeah, man, you're putting a lot of pressure on me because whoever I don't name and hears this is gonna be gunning for me, right? No, it's funny because I take so many things from other people, and I to a fault am very calculated and really think through everything critically before I do. And it's funny, I've been here almost coming up on a year now, and my girls have learned that, like, yeah, if Coach Matt is doing something, like, I guarantee you we're doing it for a reason. Like, he doesn't do something just willy-nilly. But like, I've worked under some really elite coaches as an assistant, and they've been the ones that have been, so awesome and gracious with their time to teach me. And probably I asked too many questions about why, and they're probably like, dude, just do it. But, like, if I can understand some of the coaches why, no pun intended, I think it helps me process things, because maybe I don't always agree with every little thing, but if they're trying to get something specific out of a drill or how they're doing something, maybe I tweak it for the future. And that's what I always did, and where I'm at now because of that. But I mean, like, I've worked under now Florida coach Ryan Tice, the coach that I was referencing, Brett Damrow. He is a big person in the club world now. My former employer, Julie Yankus, I was with at Southeast Missouri. She has taught me so much too. Danny Miller, who was the first person that gave me a college job, and then I steal so much from my friends. My buddy Zach Weinberg over at Evansville. What's cool about it is just the idea that there are so many really awesome people that are so willing to help others. And I think at the end of the day, we don't know everything, but I think if we can have facts behind every reason why we do it, that's all we can ever ask for. But, I have so many people out there, and coaches even, that don't coach volleyball. Like, I think our swim coach here does a really good job with a lot of team culture stuff and administrative stuff. And so I've taken stuff from him, and, it's just a hodgepodge of different stuff, and you just hope that you're doing a good job.
Yeah, for sure. I have a question off of that. I want to ask about some implementations that you've actually taken from some of the coaches, but you mentioned earlier how you are whenever if you are doing something, right, you're not doing it willy-nilly, right? Like, it's for a reason. So, like, how does that make you feel when, like, an athlete they understand there's a process behind the mayhem, basically, right? There's a reason behind why we're doing it, whether it makes sense to them in the moment or it doesn't, but they understand, like, coach is putting us through this for a reason, right? And so, like, how does that make you feel whenever they understand that and they understand that coach is doing this for that reason or whatever the case is?
Yeah, and honestly, I think a lot of coaches can probably relate to what I'm about to say is, we can demand and we can do a lot of different stuff, but a lot of the reason why people will listen to you or follow your leadership is because one of two things: they trust you, or they have built that relationship or are building that relationship with you, that it's like, hey, like, this person is willing to battle with me. And some of the things that, like, I will often say with our girls, it's not my program, it's our program. Like, I never try and make it about me. Like, when I'm talking to the team, it's like, it's for you guys. Like, I had my opportunity to win a championship and, all that different stuff. And why I'm here today is to help you create such a long lasting memory of how great your experience was. And so, I think I do explain a lot of my thought process, and when I don't, I think they still they know me well enough that they can probably put two and two together to get four. But like, I think it comes from relationship. They know that I have their back, and so, like, they're willing to see that I'm making sacrifices for them and that I'm not asking them to do something I wouldn't do myself. So, I think it's just trust and relationships ultimately lead to, a good leader and someone that has people willing to follow them.
I saw something not long ago. It sounds like I watch a lot of things. It just kind of popped up, but that there was an athlete who was speaking on one of their coaches. He was some D1 wrestler, I think, or some. I think it was wrestling. But anyways, he was saying basically, find a coach that you can trust in and has obviously standards, expectations, all the things that a good coach or good program is going to try to instill, but get you a coach that, like you mentioned, can get you can build that relationship with, because you're someone that you can basically buy into and that they're bought into you, because they're going to be able to get the most out of you, and that as in the athlete, right? And the athlete's going to get the most out of the coach, and it's going to be able to be this healthy push. Like, the athlete pushes the coach to be better, the coach is obviously pushing the athlete to be better, and you kind of get this positive growth, right, of criticism and whatever the case is, to where it's not, oh, coach is against me or coach doesn't like me because he's hard or she's hard on me. It's all out of love, right? And you see some of that, especially right now with some basketball going on or some of these sports going on as they come to the end of their season, baseball, whatever the case is, and you'll see those little videos of, like, a coach in the face or yelling at a kid. Like, I trust, it looks from the outside like, dang, this coach is mad, but if you watch either the post game interviews, or if you just can lip read, I guess, you can kind of see that they're saying, like, I need you to want this moment. I trust you. But obviously there's a lot of fire, right, from the coach. And so it's kind of cool that you say that. And I only asked that question because I had somebody back in January, one of our girls, because it was a randomly nice day in January. It was like 60 degrees, 65 degrees. It was cold, but it was really warm for January, right, in Oklahoma. And they were like, why are you making us run this loop? We have this little 3.5 mile loop that we did preseason runs. And I was like, we're going to go run that today. And they're like, what? Why? And they didn't understand it, but at least at the time, right? Because, like, why aren't we wrestling today? And so I went through it and I talked to them about those things, and it's just cool that you get that response from them. And so whenever I heard that, and they were like, well, coach isn't going to do this without a reason. Like, there's methods to his madness. And so, like, those things, I don't know, it makes me feel good, because it also makes me understand that they're starting to not only understand you as a coach, right, but they also kind of understand that, how do you even put it into words? But that they understand what we're doing and the reason behind it, and it's not just, oh, coach is putting us through this hard thing or this light thing or whatever. Like, there's that they are starting to buy in. I guess that makes sense. They've bought into whatever coach is saying. So I just had to ask from your perspective, because I had that same type of response kind of at one point, and so it made me feel good, because it's like, all right, now you understand it, right, kind of thing. And so yeah, like you said, it does help. The relationships is a huge thing, and so I appreciate you answering that question. But back to the coaching thing, or back to the other coaches. So the final thing on this was, you said you've taken a lot from all these coaches that you mentioned, but what do you think is one thing that you've taken from any of them and implemented into your program, whether that's like on the mental side, social side, things like that, or on the schematics and how you run practices, or, how you have things, programmed, whatever the case is, and however you want to answer that. But what's one thing you've taken and implemented into your program now?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that I think has been the most beneficial that I've ever stolen is, shout out to Ryan Tice at Florida. So when I worked for him, we were at Marquette, and he introduced me to the idea of a bank account in terms of relationships. And so the idea about it is, are you adding to the bank account, or are you subtracting from the bank account, and where are you with someone? So, for example, there's a lot that goes into this in terms of building relationships. But, if you and I are talking, having lunch, talking philosophical, whatever it might be, and we feel that our relationship got stronger, we're adding to our bank account. If we're on a team and maybe we're disagreeing about something, or, hey man, I'm really mad at you about this, and like you pissed me off, or whatever it might be, like, hey, we might have taken a little bit of a credit to our bank account, and now we got to work on building that back up. And so when I first heard him say that, I was like, man, I never thought about it that way. But I think that's a really great way to define relationships and friendships, right? Like, I'm the type of person that I hate when people say, like, I've got 25 best friends. I'm like, you don't have 25. Like, let's be real. Like, you have maybe a couple. I can live with a couple. I'm the type of person that says I have one best friend, but maybe I live with a couple. But, like, we all have we see the world differently, right? But like, something about a bank account and the idea that we can all understand of, like, we all want to see it go up, right? We get in trouble when it goes down. And so, some of the stuff that I do with my girls is, like, when they mess up, and we all mess up,
Of course.
like, we talk about how, like, hey, you and I we gotta be better. We gotta add something here. Like, we just took a massive hit, and I think what our girls and I do a really good job of, it's two people into one bank account. It's not like, hey, you are subtracting and, like, you're costing me. No, it's like, we didn't do this together, and that's what's costing. Even if, like, you said something that was really messed up and hurt my feelings, like, that's still our bank account together. And so, yeah, I think what is partial. I mean, Ryan Tice is a brilliant coach, and he's a brilliant recruiter, but what that guy has done is he has built programs everywhere he's gone. He's won, and he hasn't done it by sacrificing relationships. And I think that's something that, I try and strive for. So, I always joke with him. I'm like, man, I'm just trying to be like you, man. Just trying to be like you. And I saw him this weekend, and we were catching up a bit. He's a good dude, but I think. But I could tell you probably 3 other things that I steal. I don't know, man. It's tough, but I think just relationships are so important.
For sure. Yeah.
We're at the D1 level, and at the end of the day, like, I've told my girls this, like, it's in everyone's best interest that we win, right? Because if we lose, I get fired, and who knows, the coach might take you off, or like, we got to work together. And the fact that, like, if we win, everyone's happy, and we all win.
Mm-hmm.
So. But at the same time, like, I've made this comment to them, and they know, like, if we go undefeated and never lose a game, but we don't like hanging out with each other, we don't like cutting it up or anything like that, it's miserable. So, like, relationships trump winning all the time. Like, I don't care. I want to win, don't get me wrong, but, like,
I think that,
I don't want to be miserable doing it.
you mentioning the relationship stuff is, it may be not an underrated thing, but I think you're right. Like, not only for coaches to get better, but the, like the relationship within the program is important. Like we will have exit interviews, and I asked them, like, hey, how would you define the team culture this year? And they all said fun or family or really, and what was really well, or whatever the case is. I asked, like, what do we need to focus on next year? And all of them are like, just make sure we keep the same type of environment, and so that was huge for me. And so, like, when you mentioned that, like, I think that's such a big piece, especially because you want, especially at, like you said, Division I, which I might have a question for you, I think, about that as I'm talking about it. But, I think at the Division I level, you have to deal with some things that I don't. Like, I'm at the 2-year JUCO level, right? Which I guess I have to worry about kids leaving. Everyone, obviously everybody has that opportunity, but especially 2-year. But you have the transfer portal, and you have all these shenanigans, which, by the way, we won't get into, at least not horribly, because I know that's probably a hot topic in the world of Division I NCAA athletics. But anyways, like, you have a lot to deal with, right? So, like, you want the girls to stay there with you for 4 to 5 years. And the only way you keep that retention is make it feel like home, right? And so I can appreciate that that's such a big deal for you as you've transitioned into the role you're in. So speaking of the role that you're in, you went from Southeast Missouri to this one, correct? Like, that was your leap, right? Okay. So was the transition hard to go from, the different positions? Like, you went for, like you mentioned, that you were at the JV coach at the high school, and then you went to this school, right? And now you're at, or to the, I guess, like the transition, right? Like, from where you started to now. But was it difficult to go from Southeast Missouri to being the head guy, head person at a Division I level, where there's obviously a lot of things, right? You have media presence, probably a little bit more than you might have at some other levels. You have just the fact that you're at Division I level, that kind of brings its own, I don't even know, you want to put glitz and glamour, I guess. But there's obviously a lot of pros to it, maybe some cons. But in general, how was that transition, and was it difficult going from the levels that you jumped, and mainly from Southeast to Division I?
Yeah, honestly, you hear about people becoming head coaches, and then you talk to head coaches about what it's like. And so in my head, I knew what I was getting involved in, and I think I was accurate, but I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I swear I felt like for the first 3 months that I was the worst, like absolute worst. Like, I could not handle it. I mean, and part of it too is, like, every school is different on how they do different stuff. And so it's learning processes and people and all that. But, when you take that jump from an assistant to a head coach, and especially the opportunity to become a Division I head coach, you are so right. Like, the pressure is just there. I mean, it is a business at the end of the day. And so, like, there's contracts involved, and there's just, you name it, man, it's serious stuff. And so, I don't know that I understood the full extent of how much percent of my day was managing people. I mean, it's essentially, you're running a business, man. And I knew that, but I didn't know it. Like, here I have business degrees. I was, doing all this. I was like, oh, I got this. And then I was like, nope, this is tough. Like, this is not easy. And, like, thankfully, I have a full-time assistant and a couple other staff members that really hunkered down, and we were in the trenches together. And so it takes a village, though. I think, I jumped. I've made some pretty awesome jumps, and I'm very fortunate, in my career, to have been a part of a lot of championships and winning programs. And that's the goal here, is to, implement everything I've done as an assistant, hopefully create that here. And, when I was hired, I took over a program that was pretty new to Division I, and, they were 9-19 overall. And I believe it was 295 out of 365 RPI. And, When I was
Oh,
talking
wow.
to the AD, I was thinking, I was like, hey, it might take a little while. Like we got some realistic expectations here first. And, I think we just did a really good job of changing culture and implementing our systems, and we took our program to 18-12 and 172, I think, RPI. So we doubled everything, and I thought this was what year two might look like. I didn't think it was going to be year one. And
Year
so
one.
I've been very fortunate. I have an incredible staff. I've got an incredible administration. But at the end of the day, like, the girls are the ones that win the championships and do everything. And so, our goal for next year is to try and make the NCAA tournament. And we just had the men's basketball team in March Madness. And so, it's actually crazy. I didn't realize how much it was going to blow up our Instagrams. I swear I'm getting way more emails. Like,
Yeah.
it's been awesome. I'm super proud and happy for this university. And I was telling my girls, I was like, dude, it's our time. Like, I
Yeah.
would love this. And, we were picked 11th at the beginning of the year in our conference and finished 6th. And I'm like, that's awesome when you can make that
Yeah.
jump. But we're gonna be real mad if we get 6th next year. Like it's time to take a big leap forward. And but man, it's just a wild ride. I don't think I was ever prepared to be a head coach, and I always had that itch. I worked for Julie Ankis at Southeast for 5 seasons and 6 years. She was amazing. I mean, she is truly an amazing woman. She's an amazing coach, like program runner, and she allowed me to learn so much from her. And I swear, especially during the season, I was calling her once a week, if not more. I'm like, dude, tell me what you would do here. I was like, I think I know what I should do, but I don't really know. And she always trusted me, and she gave me really good advice, and she listens, but she's like, dude, like, trust your gut. If you have a good reason behind it, trust your gut and go for it. So, but no, it's fun. I still don't. It's hard to believe that we get paid to do this. Like we get money to hang out in a gym. Like I get to pay my family's bills by just like blowing a whistle. Like it's pretty cool. So, it's a wild ride. And for coaches out there listening, like, it's okay to struggle, like, I won a lot of games and I'm very grateful and I hope it continues, but, it's way easier said than done when you're winning to say this, but, the winning or losing doesn't define you. Like, just,
for sure.
It's going back to the relationships, man. Like, just crush it. Just do your best and to rock out,
Yeah.
Yeah, don't let the the outcome of the sport be your identity, right? Like it can't be who you are. It can't dictate if you're a good person or a bad person or whatever the case is. And I think that's a great thing to have instilled. But you mentioned, like your basketball team made March Madness, and so you got all these emails. So like having those other sports do well really does help, which I always kind of assumed that was the case, right? Like I talked to a softball coach a while ago. She coached at Ohio University, and she kind of felt that too, because like I think the football team was doing really well at the time when I talked to her, and she's like, yeah, it was really cool to kind of see that, and it really does help with recruiting, and to say, hey, like, especially football, like, hey, football, come here and watch, maybe they come on recruiting in fall, right, because of the fact that they're a spring sport, and it kind of helps with the environment and like the positive thoughts, right? And so like that does, I can only imagine that really does help with other sports, just because it obviously helps your sport, but it does help with just the idea of people wanting to show up there. And you have a great mindset, it sounds like, of that. You guys went from 11th to 6th, I should say, voted 11th, finished 6th, and that's your goal, is to be in a NCAA tournament next year. And so you kind of mentioned the pressure, right? And so one thing that I have this is your first year, right? And so I've been asked this question about, do I feel pressure? I actually got asked this question. We had a national finals this year. So like as a first year head coach, I had a girl make the national finals, right? And so like we were on TV, we got like I was suited and booted, right? Like it was legit. And so like I never, like, to say that, as a first year coach at college level, like that's kind of cool, right? And so like while we were waiting for that match during warm-ups, I got asked, like, do you feel pressure? and I might have been asked this too at some point on one of our road trips. And I'll answer this because I don't think I've ever done this. I think I always ask you, and then and I'll come in after. But I'm gonna do it first. So I'm gonna try. I don't know, try something new, I guess. But like the question is gonna be like, do you feel like there's pressure? And I feel like at your level, pressure is something that I feel like some people handle well, some people don't, right? And so one thing that I was always worried about whenever if somebody asked me like, hey, do you ever want to coach at like the Division I level or like the highest level possible, right? I was always kind of worried that like I might lose the passion, right? Not because I don't love the sport, but it's like you have more pressure on you. You have more, like you said, more business type of approach to it because it is truly what it is, right? Like if you don't win at the Division I level, which some coaches get a lot longer leash than others, like, and I think football probably doesn't do a good job because football is really short. Like you have a 2 to 3 year window, and you're probably gone if you're depending on what school you're at. But anyways, like you kind of have this built-in pressure. So like I feel like that can be something that is difficult for some people, and some people handle it that way, some people don't. And like that was always something I felt like I would be maybe not worried about, but like in the back of my mind, like I just don't want to. I don't want to I got to that level and then hate it because there's so much more going on versus at this level or maybe even like D2 or whatever, right? Like it may not be that way just because, and if it is, it might give you a little bit more time. But anyways, like you don't have as much pressure as you do at the Division I level or whatever the case is. So it sounds like you have some pressure that you've dealt with, and I guess referencing what I was going to say as well is when I got asked that question about my pressure, I was like, I think it's more self-inflicted, especially being a first-year coach, they understand it's going to take a few years in general to kind of build success. And as long as you're doing all the right things, like out of the coaching, right, doing all the paperwork right, learning from your mistakes and especially if they're, obviously we don't want any major mistakes, which no coach, no program does. But the idea of like doing all the right things and you're learning and you're growing, right, all that stuff will come, and so will the successes. But I have self-inflicted, self-indicted pressure because, like you said, you've been fortunate to have a lot of winning programs be around it, right? Like I want to be a national championship, coach, and I want our team to feel it. I want the girls to feel it. I want every girl to have the opportunity to be on that podium and stuff, right? And so, like, I kind of have the self-inflicted pressure, and so whether that's healthy or not, I don't know, but it definitely kind of created on my own. And so, like for you, you went from Southeast Missouri to like, you went from that division to the highest division possible, right? And so, you may or may not have felt pressure, but I guess you can answer it. Do you feel like there's been pressure, just going from the division you were in to now, right? Like it's just kind of probably a natural thing, but what was that something that you felt like you had to face as much? I know I didn't really feel it, but I know there is some a little bit, right? It's just doing all the right things more of versus winning and losing, but you probably have a little bit of it all being the first year coach, right? Or maybe being at the Division I level. So anyways, does that question make sense? Like the pressure side of it and some of that? Okay.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. The idea, I think pressure can be external, but a lot of, I think for me, and it sounds like you, can be internal because we have expectations and we care and we have hopes. And so there's a famous Ted Lasso scene that I always think about. He talks about, he's like, there's a saying you guys have over here, it's the hope that kills you. And he talks about, he's like, no, the hope is actually what drives you and makes it fun, And I'd be lying to say that, that first weekend that I coached matches that I wasn't nervous. Like I was
For
very
sure.
nervous, right? Like, it's funny,
Sorry,
I'm not laughing at you because it's like the way that you said that. Like I was the same way. The very first time I was in a college corner, so even the girls were making jokes like, "Coach, you nervous? You nervous?" And I was like, "No," but in my head I was like, "Absolutely, I am." Like you don't know it, but like I am. But anyways,
right.
I could tell how you said that.
Yeah, like it's funny. I think back to some of those moments. Like I know some of I'll never forget some of the moments that I felt the most pressure. and it was at different levels. Like I was like, whoa, this is like the biggest match that I've ever felt. Like at high school, it was like we made a state tournament. I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool, and then I was at the D3 level and we were in the and we won a conference championship and we won that. I was like, wow, this is pretty sick. And then I was coaching when I was at Marquette and we were playing at Wisconsin. And for those of you that don't know, Wisconsin historically for the past, I don't know, like it must be 20 years now, has been, a top 5 team in the country. And we went in and reverse swept them and beat them. And I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool, but the pressure is crazy. And I could say when we played Kentucky when I was at Southeast in the tournament, and there's so many key moments that I was like, yeah, I turn around, I'm like, where am I? Like, how the heck did I get here? But you know what? The thing that's, and this goes back to what you were saying, I smiled because I must be the same as you. I put the most pressure on myself because I want it for my athletes so badly. Like, I don't want it for me. And there's a lot of people that coach for them, and I don't agree with that. But I want to give every possible winning chance to my athletes that I can. And so if I let my athletes down, I will let them know that, and it's on me. So, I think pressure, but as I've gotten older, I've allowed myself to have a little more grace than I probably used to, which is kind of funny because I've been moving up, but then trying to give myself a little more grace. But, I work my tail off so that when push comes to shove, that I can take a breath and then focus on what I need to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, pressure is a privilege. Pressure obviously makes diamonds, all these cliche things, but I had to learn comparison's the thief of joy. It's probably one of my favorite quotes, especially, I walk into a program that, we have had a few national champions as a team individually previously to me. And, just the idea that like, it's funny because you mentioned the stages, right? Like, oh, I'm at this stage. Like, I've coached the state champ. I've been in a corner of a state championship, right? I've had state champs at the high school level, won a state title with as a team and all these things. But like now I'm at this level, right? And it's like, dang, I'm on this elevated stage in a suit and tie on TV at the national level, right? And like it's just kind of one of those things where that is, but like I've also had to realize like comparison's the thief of joy. So it's like don't compare. I've had to learn, like you said, you kind of giving yourself some of that space. I've kind of had to do the same thing. Like, don't compare yourself to these programs that this coach has been there for 15, 20 years or maybe even 4 or 5 years, and they've had these things, right? And whatever you're comparing, or some people compare themselves to. And I've had to learn that does take it away. So now it's like, yeah, my goal is to beat them. My goal is to be that person, or as a coach, my goal is to be that. My goal is on the coaching side of things, I guess as a coach for this program, is like I want our program to be bringing home the national championship banner, right? And I think that's every coach's goal. But like, I also can't compare necessarily, just because it'll take that joy away of like the all the journey, right? The journey is what we do it for, and all the ups and downs. And so I can appreciate your self-inflicted pressure, even though it's probably not sometimes it can't be healthy, sometimes it can, but just the idea that you sound, like you said, it sounds like we're on the same page of how you like to navigate. And so, speaking of kind of, how you've been around a lot of programs that won. I know we've talked about that already. And now you flipped the program around this year, essentially, right? From doubling RPIs and wins and losses, essentially. But how do you coach a team or give feedback after a tough loss, or maybe after a season that didn't go your way, which you may not have experienced necessarily, but like on the idea that like this year, like you might have had a tough loss, or you might have had one of those moments you've had to like talk your team through, right? Maybe even individuals. Maybe it's a star girl that you thought was going to be a star and she's not there yet, right? Or she just hasn't developed, whatever the case is. But how do you teach or coach feedback after tough losses, tough seasons, whatever the case is, tough nights?
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny, like I'm pretty open and frank with people, And
sorry, I just liked the way that you were. That was very like PR like PR trained essentially. Like I'm very yeah I got you. I thought that was funny. Anyways, continue.
so I'm honest, but there were I don't know. It's funny. I will talk and give some speeches, and I'll be honest, but I think a lot of where it comes from is reflecting on what happened and how we can get better, and then what do we need to do to win the next game. And I think at the end of the day, you can usually tell when if you didn't play super well or whatever it was, but like, did we try and do the right things? Was our effort and our intentions there? And at the end of the day, in almost every sport other than maybe like a soccer or maybe hockey, like there's going to be a winner and loser. I don't like these sports that tie. I think that's lame, but I probably shouldn't say that. So, like there's going to be someone that loses, right? Like we won multiple games this year in the fifth set, 18-16, but we also lost, some heartbreakers by 2 points. So, here's one, I'll say this, and this is more of a funny thing. Like we were in the middle of a game and we were not playing very well. And, sometimes like if you yell at someone, sometimes it works. Most of the time it doesn't. And it's more of like, you can yell at to encourage, but like, sometimes they just need a reset. And so one day, this is famous with my team, they still bring it up. We had very mopey and pouty faces, and I couldn't understand. I'm like, what? Like, what's going? Like, why? And I was like, no one is kicking your dog. Like, no one is picking up your dog and kicking it. Like, your dog is safe. It's fine. I promise. It's all good. And that got a lot of smirks. They wanted to laugh, but they knew that like coach was being serious. And I was like, no, it's funny. It is funny. I'm trying to make a joke so that you guys relax, right? But like, there's not a perfect thing to say after a tough loss. We went on, it was one of our first weekend or I think we're 3 weekends into the year, second week, I can't remember now. But we were multiple weekends in the year, and we had like a 6-game win streak, and we had won more games already than some of like they had won previous years. Like it was ridiculous. And we lost a really emotional, tough game. And I go in the locker room and I could see that everyone cared. And I was like, honestly, this is all I need to see, is that like, as we're building, that you care about losing, because like I can rock with this team. Like this team actually is like, crap, I don't want to lose. Like I want to win. And the first thing I said, it was like, all right, raise your hand if you never thought we were going to lose a game again. And you could see that little smirks coming on their faces again. I'm like, all right, exactly. We all have our hand down. We knew we were going to lose, but like, how do we bounce back so we don't feel like this very often? And so I think at the end of the day, there's a lot that as coaches and players that we can learn from when we win. And it feels good. We all love that. But I think what I try and do, and don't get me wrong, I can be salty and mopey and mad, and say some choice words, maybe under my breath, maybe not, I don't know. But like, we have to get ready to win the next game. You have to, right? Because like at the end of the day, you can't change what just happened. All you can do is try and get better. And I think athletes in the college level, and honestly even high school too, like they want to win. It doesn't matter if you're JUCO, D3, NAI, we all want to win. It's just about how do we get better for next time and how do we learn from it. So I don't know, my advice for coaches, like we all want it. If you can see, like you can get mad if like it's clear that they were throwing the game or not trying, but I think that is the result of like stuff you should see in practice, and it should be, talked about then. But, I think like all in this together, for sure. Like as a head coach, like I theoretically have a record as a head coach, but like it's the Queen's volleyball record. Like that's a reflection of me, just like it is my student athletes. So, we're in it together. When they lose, I lose. When I win, they win. We have a saying in our locker room. It's you matter. and that's all it says. And then around it has a bunch of sticky notes that we all wrote about each other and saying, this is why you matter to the program. And it talks about each individual. And every day they see that. Before they walk out to the gym, they see the sign that says you matter. And it's amazing. I mean, like, we all have different roles, and in team sports, you know, we all want to be the guy or the girl that scores all the points, but like, it can't be, you know, like, that's just not how it works. Someone's going to have more points, and there's going to be some people that don't play, but that doesn't mean the person that doesn't play doesn't contribute to a championship team. So
absolutely. You know, so like that person who's on the bench, right? Or maybe the person who's not getting a whole lot of playing time right now, you know, like you said, everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to contribute. Not everybody has the ability to do that, at least not right away, right? In today's world, like we talked about earlier, I guess how I kind of mentioned earlier, the transfer portal doesn't help with some of those things and all that. But, you know, for the kids who are there, they've bought in, right? And I know there's some variables to this question, so take that with a grain of salt. But what I'm getting to is everybody wants to find their way onto the court, right? They all want to contribute other than just being a good teammate. So where do you start with development, and how do you get that person who wants to contribute go from, like, if this was high school, right? Or I know there's some colleges out there who have JV teams. So some people, you know, to go from JV to that varsity or whatever the case is, right? The idea is, how do we get somebody to go from not getting a whole lot of playing time right now at the varsity level essentially to essentially get on the court, right? And I know, like I said, there's variables to it. Their buy-in, their their physical development, some of those things, but in general, kind of where do you start so that person can actually contribute to that championship team, at least more than maybe just being that 17th person on the bench or whatever the case is, right? And just being a good team player.
Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, there probably is always a 17th person, right? Like, I guess someone has to be in some respect. You know, I think a lot of coaches will have different strategies and ideas about how to do that. And, you know, what mine is, I'm very open and honest with my student athletes about how they can improve. You know, so I am totally anti telling a kid, like, you're doing great, you got nothing to work on, like, blah, 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 but then not play them. You know, like, there's so many coaches that just want to avoid tough conversations because it's easy for them. I have, at the bare minimum, monthly meetings with every single girl in my program. And my door is always open. We have a scheduling app that they can always come and schedule a meeting, and, you know, they can talk about playing time, they can talk about life, whatever it is. But if they have anything revolving around volleyball or how they need to improve, my job as the coach is to provide concrete evidence of, you know, what I am doing and why and how they can improve. You know, there's a lot of coaches that don't necessarily want to explain their thought process. I completely disagree. I think it's important for everyone to understand where they're at and how they can get better and what I'm thinking. And just like you talked about earlier, you know, I'm the first one to say, like, hey, I should have done that. You're right. Like, I made a mistake there. Like, I actually think you're right. Like, I should have gotten you in that moment. But I think part of having that conversation has then led to the solid relationships, right? Because like, they trust me and they know that, like, and I'll be open and honest, like, of course we all have, as coaches, have favorites, like, of our athletes. Like, there's a couple kids that, like, you know, that you would be like, I would, when you're older, I will be your friend. Like, when you are way out, you know, like, I would hang out with you, like, we have similar interests, all that. And there's people that's like, hey, I don't know, like, other than volleyball, that we would have much in common, and that's okay. But a good coach and a good program knows that, like, the coaches aren't just going to play favorites. You know, like, my favorites when it gets on the court is whoever helps win us a championship, right? You know, so I think when that person that maybe isn't super happy with their role wants to come talk about how they can increase their role, it's important as coaches that we can provide that material for them about, you know, maybe they really don't, they have to work on one or two skills, but maybe the person ahead of them is just playing that much higher of an elite spot. And if you can show them why, I think that really matters. And ultimately, I think athletes really care about, playing and all that different stuff, but they will understand when a coach can show them, hey, I want you to improve because the team also improves because of that. And when you get to this level, if you're outperforming, you're going to earn your playing time. And I know there are a lot of coaches that can relate to this where student athletes will come in and say like, well, I feel like if I make 1 or 2 mistakes, I'm out, versus Susie or Johnny that can make 4 or 5 mistakes and then you still keep them in. Right. And like, I think when you have that open dialect about maybe why you're doing different stuff, like they're like, okay, well, if I do X, Y, and Z in practice, then I can get to Susie or Johnny's level where maybe I do have a little bit of a longer leash. So it kind of goes back to your idea of like comparison is the thief of joy. Like these student athletes feel that often. Like they want to be so-and-so on that court or on the mat or anything like that. They want to be the guy or the girl that's out there. So how do you help them get there? And everyone's path and journey looks different, and none of them is right or wrong. And I'm cool with that. But I think the more that as coaches we can be direct, honest with feedback, I think the better the student athletes are in terms of their mental headspace, how they can improve, how they're going to attack practice and all that different stuff.
I think that as you mentioned about like this whole development and, especially like how you said, like these student athletes do that. I think another piece of it is, they want to do that, but like, can their egos, and I don't mean this in a bad way, right? But I do think that every person out there that's an athlete or was an ex-athlete, I think even coaches too, have a little bit of an ego, right? And it just depends on how much of that ego plays a factor into your everyday life, right? Like something simple, like, yeah, we have an ego like of this right here. It's not huge, it's not seen, right? But it's there a little bit just because that's just probably more on the competitive side. Maybe not true ego, it's more just competitive. But then you have the other side of it where like the ego plays such a big factor that's like, well, coach doesn't like me, or like coach told me this, but like I already do that. I'm already good enough for that, or whatever the case is, right? So like their mental also really matters. And maybe ego might be the wrong term, but like just their willingness, I guess, coachability also makes a huge factor in what you're mentioning. Because if you have the open dialogue, that's great, and they listen to you, but are they willing to put in the work to actually reach that level, right? I think plays a huge factor into actually finding that success.
For sure. So, absolutely.
I don't want to spend too much time on this recruiting stuff. I told you we're going to get in the transfer portal, but you said something earlier about club, AAU, stuff like that. So I'm going to ask you a question on that here in a second. But, when it comes to like recruiting, right, you went, Southeast Missouri, you spent time at Marquette, right? You spent time at some of these places, and obviously now you're the head coach at a Queens. So like when you think about recruiting, now you're looking at girls who, I don't know who you're going after. So I guess we'll just start here. So like, where do you find athletes? How does it feel knowing that like you might be looking at the same girl as Nebraska or Wisconsin, and probably throwing your hat in the ring, I would assume, right? Like you're probably not trying to go after some of these girls, right? So like, where are you finding them? What are you looking for in an athlete? And what kind of stands out as you kind of round your team out each year?
Yeah, good question. So I think what I have done a very good job of over the years is understanding what the expectations are from administration about, okay, what do I need to do? What are you expecting from a winning standpoint? Okay. And then is the funding that you're expecting kind of matching, right? Like making sure we can optimize our funding for expectations. And then what I always did a really good job of was I would then take whatever expectation was. So if the expectation was, hey, you need to win your conference and get into the NCAA tournament. Okay, so you said I need to win my conference. Who is in my conference? Who are they recruiting? What historically has helped this program or other programs beat that team? And so then when I understand the level, then it's really easy. Okay, then I need to make sure I find this sort of kid. So whether that's based on how tall they are, how hard they hit, anything like that, whatever that metric is that helps us win that or meet that expectation, that's what I need to go find. And so I've had this conversation a lot with young coaches. It's like, what do I do? Like, I've never recruited before. How do I do anything? I'm like, okay, first thing you can do is go find kids on your team that find their recruiting video. Find video of them from when they were 16 or 17 or 18 years old. And then watch what they look like now and see that development, right? Because what we recruit at 16 hopefully is a lot worse than what we develop them in when they're 21 years old, right? So like, if you can find that kid right away, man, you're going to jump really fast because that kid's also going to develop. But the biggest thing that I always say is go recruit kids that make your gym better, but also are going to help defeat some of those conference opponents or whatever the expectations are. And so, what was really challenging for me when I took this job, it was at the end of April. And so when I got on campus, my current student athletes here at Queens, like they were already done, like they're already going home for summer. So I didn't even get to see what they looked like, to see like kind of what are some of the deficiencies. And so at that point I was like, man, I got to hit the ground running to get some of these kids, because a lot of them are already signing here. And so we ended up pulling 7 kids that committed and are going to come and join our team in the fall. And man, I tell you, I think I over recruited in a way that, like, obviously we always want higher talent, but I think what was really awesome was I thought I needed even a higher level, and the kids we got coming in are so freaking good. Knock on wood, right? I better knock on wood when I say that, but I don't, it's hard. Like, everyone's got a different eye, and that doesn't mean that someone's right or wrong. And my style tends to be kids that, they might not start their freshman year, but when they get to their ceiling, man, are they going to be freaking good. Like there's probably kids that are a little better that I could take, but maybe they're 5'11" versus 6'2". Maybe they can jump and hit a ball well at 9'8", but I can get a kid that touches 10'1" that I just need to train a little more. That if she had her stuff together right now, she's going at that next level, right? So it's figuring out niches. Our goal for next year is to be a top 125 team in the country, and then by year 3 we're top 100. And so that would be. I mean, if I pull it off, that's great. But it starts with working our tail off on the recruiting trail and finding those kids. And thankfully, I don't know how it is in other sports, but thankfully volleyball is really good about getting teams from all across the country and putting them in one location. And then college coaches then can go to one location and see hundreds of courts going on. Now they charge us out of the wazoo for that time, but like it's really, I would assume that we have a way better than maybe like a basketball or anything else that plays across the country. And like, man, how are you going to go see that kid in Washington, but then there's kids you want to see in Florida or Maine or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Like on any given weekend, there's maybe 1 or 2 locations across the country for us that we know that we have to be at. And so it's harder to miss in volleyball than maybe other sports. Like we get to see a lot of different kids. So, but it's a grind, man. As you know, and I know this at the JUCO level, because you're turning over kids like left, right, and center. Hopefully, at least. So you're grinding all the time finding those kids. So yeah, us 4-year schools, man, like we hope to keep our kids,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I mean, you hit a few things that I definitely want to touch base on, but like you just said about like the turning over. Yeah. Like I feel like at the 4-year level, especially I guess really any sport, I shouldn't say team sport, but I think really any sport, you might have walked in, like in your particular situation, right? You might have walked into a bunch of sophomores or juniors or whatever the case is, right? I guess, and like you don't have to have such a big recruiting class this year because you have, let's just say out of those 17, right? I don't know actually you have, but I should say 17. Let's say you had 10 returning or 12, right? So you only had to really go after 4 or 5 girls versus other years you might have to go after 10 or 12, right? Like, yeah, on my side, like somebody asked me the other day, like how many girls you have coming in or how many girls do you have this year? And I was like, we had 22, we lose 6. And they were like, well, how many are you getting? I was like, well, we're bringing in right now we have 17 or 18 committed. So we're already at like 30, 32 girls next year. And they're like, why? And I'm like, well, because for one, wrestling's a little bit different. We want depth, right? All these things, but talent, of course, like we want to be national champs. You mentioned earlier about like you bring in you bring in the talent, you bring in the right people, right? They push each other healthily, and that's how you grow, right? In that regard. But yeah, every 2 years, Mike, really, I'm setting myself up for like 15 out to bring 15 in, right? And that's really every year type of thing. So it is a lot. But you mentioned also though about like you have these volleyball events that you can go look at, and you have hundreds or thousands of athletes, however many are actually there, right? And so like there are a few tournaments, at least in wrestling wise. I know baseball has like PG, which is like perfect game showcases and stuff like that. Wrestling, you don't really have showcases, but you can, for one, I guess you could go to camps, you could host camps, but really the events, you really have like 3 or 4 in the off season that are kind of at the biggest level. You have one out in Virginia Beach. It's kind of like right after high school season's over. It's, Virginia Beach Nationals. You have Fargo, which is the biggest event in the entire country up in North Dakota. Happens in middle of July. All 3 styles. You have every single state represented. There's between 2,000 kids in each weight or in each age group that come out. And so, yeah, I mean, every sport I'm sure has their own thing. But yeah, wrestling is kind of that way where we have our 1 or 2 big events that we make sure we have to at least recruit or at least see, going to, whether we're recruiting for this year or next year, whatever. But absolutely, I can see how that's a big deal. And so I do have a question about the Club AAU, but I just had a quick question on this. Is like, you mentioned kind of a 2-part. You actually kind of answered it, but like, I think for me, you mentioned how every coach has a different eye. They kind of see things differently with the recruits or whatever. But like I know at least in wrestling, some coaches recruit. Yeah, obviously we're all going for the tough, best talent, whatever, men's and women's. But you also kind of recruit for your style, right? Like I know our men's coach, he likes to recruit length. So like he'll get guys who are, wrestling a certain weight class, but they're tall, right? So like kind of compared to normal size for that weight class, he's going for taller people because he's taller. And he knows how to coach taller, right? And like I know there's some other coaches out there who kind of like speed, or some like just more of a in your face grind, like kind of more strength, right? And then whatever the case is, you kind of have these different styles. And so you kind of answered it, but like just on a quick note, do you feel like recruiting to win, like you said, like you're looking at where these teams have done to beat them, whatever, like are you recruiting more for to win, which obviously we all want to win, but being that you're a 4-year, are you recruiting more for style because you know how to coach them so they can develop to win, right? So like, does that question make sense essentially?
Yeah no,
Okay.
I think for sure. So I think one of my biggest things I say to people is, I think coaches need a recruiting, especially the 4-year. Like we need a recruiting plan. Like we never truly know how a prospect is going to turn into, from 16 years old to 18 and then 18 subsequently to when they get to college. Like we can probably guess based on getting to know them, getting to know their club coaches or AAU coaches, and then maybe people that they remind us of that we previously coached, right? And so I think you nailed it too. Like we all have a style, and so I've had this conversation. What I like to do is, okay, look at the kids that, like are on their championship teams, but like if you want to recruit an all conference libero or an outside hitter, whatever it might be, whatever position, or for wrestling, if you want to like I don't know, I think it's 132 is one of the weight classes, maybe. I don't know.
High school's 32, college is 33, so that's pretty good.
All right. So if you want a wrestler at that's really good, like let's go look at other conferences or places that those kids are really good. What does that kid look like? And it's interesting too, like because like we all have a different style, right? So like your wrestling coach might like a lot of length. Well, maybe that's great, but maybe that's not what is winning a lot of championships right now. So like I think the best coaches are able to have a plan, but like are willing to adjust a little based on what is going to work. And then how do I make you the best version of yourself? And so, I think for me, like I like a lot of length. I like a lot of athleticism. So I might pass on a kid that has all the fundamentals and all the different stuff, but maybe is at a lower level in terms of, you know, their ceiling, like I talked about. And so my job is they're paying me money to coach these kids. And so like if I can't teach you to be 6'3", I can't teach you to do all this different stuff and have arms down past your knees, right? But like I can teach you how to do some basic stuff, and it might take a year, but I guess I bet on myself in so many ways that I'm going to be able to outcoach other people. And so I'm willing to take more of a kid that, I don't know if project's not the right word, but someone that maybe has more development or has a different journey than someone's ready to go. And here's what I will tell you though. So talking a little about the portal, like I've done a really good job out of the portal for a number of years, and my plan is always like, okay, hey, I need this specific type of kid to basically run whatever part of my system or offense that I am lacking right now. And so I'm not just looking like, hey, I'll take whatever this and this, but like I am very specific with my transfers and have a designed basically plan for them of how they will impact. But my 4-year recruiting is very much like I'm going to develop you and then we're going to play to your strengths. So, but yeah, you know, it's interesting. Everyone's got a different eye, and it's not right or wrong, but I will say like the best coaches out there tend to be very good recruiters, but they're also someone that has plans for how they're going to win.
No, yeah, understanding the system, right? Like your system you've built or you're developing, and knowing that. And I think the portal call that you just mentioned is a very, very good point. You know, you're not just going after anybody, you're going after specific people and stuff like that. And like you mentioned earlier, you know, you mentioned in the weight class thing, great pool there. You called it pretty, I mean, great pool. That was exactly kind of what I like to do. And you knowing a weight class was impressive too, you know. That's a great call there. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's all very, very important things when it comes to recruiting and stuff like that. So, you know, now I can ask you the question on the club thing, because, you know, like probably similar to what you look for maybe just on a normal scale, right? On a normal day of recruiting, is you're probably still kind of pulling, you know, I guess maybe not to reference wrestling, but like you're looking, when you go to a club event or an AAU event, do you think that, okay, it's kind of a two-parter. One, you keep that same type of mentality when you go to a big event like that because you have so many athletes you can look at one time. So, like, is that something you try to maintain even when you go to those events? And then the second part of this is probably more on the hot topic side, is like, not referencing the store, but but the AAU and club scene, like that's such a big topic in the world of sports, right? The pay to play, all this stuff. So, like, how do you think that has affected volleyball, knowing that you have to pay to be on a team to go to an event like this, where you do have hundreds of, you know, 200 college coaches going to this event, but that person may have had to pay $1,000 just to make the team or whatever the case is, right? Or even be considered for the team. So, like, I guess to answer both of those questions about the club and AAU stuff.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because volleyball has now become one of the premier sports, and since probably, I'm going to say, you know, especially after COVID, I'm going to say like 2020 and to now, like the sport is honestly probably the number one female sport. Maybe I'm biased, but I honestly truly think from a number standpoint, from viewership, it's probably there now. And you know, basically Division I volleyball is actually going to be shifting here in the next couple of years to even start a little earlier. And a lot of it has to do with TV deals, getting it more on TV. And, you know, a lot of the time we play the same days as a football. So they're like, man, everyone wants a good sport to watch that isn't on Saturday. So it's like, how can we get more during that time? Because NFL hasn't started. You know, they're like, what can we do? And they're like, wait, volleyball is actually really great for TV because it's fast, it's moving, people can understand the basics of volleyball. And so TV money has now bled into college, which is now bleeding into club and AAUs. And so, you know, now it's more a business than it's ever been. And there's, these big AAU events that are making a lot of people a lot of money. And so, it's interesting. It's tough. It's a tough world we live in where something so fun can now be, people are going to take advantage of that,
Yeah.
and so it's tough at times. Yeah, these kids are, volleyball is very much a team game, and like it's unlike basketball where, you can go to a park and generally there's, a couple basketball hoops. You might see some public volleyball courts like a sand court, but it's way less than people think. And so a lot of the time people are having to rent gyms and it costs money. Like volleyball is a very affluential sport. And, thankfully, I think volleyball has really grown recently to grow in terms of diversity and popularity. I think that's something that is really awesome in this sport that we really need more of. And it's seeing more people that don't always look the same on TV. That's like now, hey, like I can see other people that look like me playing the game, and it's awesome. It's really grown, and so that's really cool. But it's funny, I'm thinking back to a conversation I had this week. One of my good buddies is an assistant coach at Penn State, and I was joking with him. I was like, yeah, like I've found a lot of kids that can help me win and elevate my gym. And he goes, yeah, I think I found one. And I was like, yeah, like, so I told him, I was like, I don't know who has to work harder, you or me, because if you don't get that one kid, it's tough. But if I don't get one kid, I can still find 200 kids that make me better, right? So I don't know. It's interesting though. That's what I love about mid majors though, is like there's pressure going back, but like I'm not banking my life on trying to get under 10 kids in the country every year. So it's just different. It's different.
You referencing the TV deals and all that stuff. That's a great point, and I do know, like, every time fall comes around, like you see, Nebraska sells out every year. Obviously they made that huge headline about, them selling out. I think it might have been one, or not last year, but 2-3 years ago, about the first time ever, whatever it was. Like, they made huge news because of how many people came out. And then, like Vanderbilt, I think this was their first year program, I believe, or first year in forever. And they were successful. And so, like, you see it. Maybe it's also because I would just follow a lot of sports things on social media, but still though, I see the viewership and all that stuff, right? And like, like I can understand, women's basketball college wise is on Sundays a lot, at least during the time frame. So like, I can understand why they do that, because like you said, I do think volleyball is at least the last few years, like you said as well, has really started making that push in viewership numbers, just like with women's basketball, which I don't know if it's the same anymore, but I know like the 2 or 3 years after Caitlin Clark, right? Like basketball, when her was there, Angel Reese, that little beef between it, some people like it, some people hate it, people make it what it is, off the court stuff, but like, those things get views, those things get people to watch. And so like, obviously volleyball doesn't have that style of like beef, but you can kind of see like the development just of what volleyball's done, kind of underlining too, like it's not like it's football where you're getting all these huge things, volleyball's kind of like taking this whole conference alignment thing and ran with it. They haven't really I know that there's coaches out there who are not necessarily happy with, Oregon having to travel to Indiana for a conference game, but it is what it is, and they're kind of take it with a grain of salt, and they've blown it up to now they can make their money, like you said, affluential, and it's what I'm getting to is it's really cool to see that, and you're right. I don't know which one's harder, going after one kid or being able to go after 200 and be able to find success because of where you're at, right? And obviously your goal is to get to that level. Like Queens, you want to be in the Final Four with Texas and A&M and Nebraska and all these schools at Wisconsin, and whomever else I missed that is normally in the Final Four. Penn State, I think, was really good for a long time, or still is, probably still good. So, like, yeah, like I don't know which one's harder, but you probably have just as much fun, if not more fun, than some of those probably big schools, just because you're on the climb, right? Like if you have, so it's cool to see, when it comes to that. And so I appreciate you answering the club scene. I know that's one of those topics where it can be, you could have a whole nother podcast for just talking AAU club and all that, right? And so, and then of course, going back to that, I appreciate you answering the recruiting for style and the winning and stuff like that. But to kind of finish up, I have a few final philosophy questions, I think. It's kind of my favorite, these are I think some of my favorite questions, there we go, to ask you. And one of them, especially because I guess it doesn't matter if you've won a lot or you haven't, but you're in position that you did have a good success, or a successful first season, and you came from programs that have won before. But the question is, how do you build a successful culture on the level of buy-in and mindset? And I know probably the relationship part's probably one of the biggest things, I would assume. So if you want to retouch base on that, that's fine. But anyways, like, how do you build that culture, and how do you get these girls to buy in?
Yeah, it's what I always say about culture is culture's got to be an every day, every week kind of thing. You can't just talk about it at the beginning of the season and never talk about it again. So like I talk about it all the time. And so one of the things we do in our program every day, if it was after a game, after a practice, it doesn't matter, is what I will say, I'm never usually the last one to talk. I will give my spiel, and what I'll say is, all right, I'm opening it up for shout outs. So you can shout out your teammates. You can have any reflections. You can have any just general statements about practice, anything like that. And 99% of the time, it's basically a shout out where the girls will acknowledge their teammates for whether it was hard work or they did something really well. It's rare that they ever be like, hey, Susie, you got to be better doing this. Usually it's like, hey, right, Susie, you did awesome doing X, Y, and Z. But what I think is really good about that is we like to point out really good things about people, and everyone likes to feel like, they're appreciated and noticed. But, from a culture standpoint, I think honestly, it goes back to the idea that we are a family. And it's so cliche and everyone uses it, but like, families fight, and that's okay. But families make up, and it's built on a level of trust and relationships. And it always comes back to the idea of like, we're all in this together and we're all working towards the same goals. And what I will always say is like, I believe in you guys, and I'm putting these expectations and I'm putting these standards for you guys to help you succeed. I wouldn't do it, or I wouldn't keep them as high if I didn't believe that they were obtainable, right? Because it's like, right, realistically speaking, I don't mean this in a bad way, but my kids are not winning a national championship. My kids, if I make a Sweet 16, X, Y, and Z school is calling me, and that's awesome, right? But like, my attainable goal is to win conference, get into the NCAA tournament, go play a top 15 school in the country, and go try and compete our best. And if I can do that, our kids and our admin are thrilled. But culture starts when you have that belief and you look at the steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 about how we are going to get there. It doesn't have to be actual on-court athletic related stuff. It could be about communication. It could be about timeliness. It could be about communication. It's funny, like, I often shut down the idea of when someone kind of shouts someone out about effort and attitude, because I'm like, okay, that should be non-negotiable. Like, we should just be doing that anyways, right? But right. But at the same time, I appreciate when someone says that, because that means that they go above and beyond. Like, there's still a standard, but I think culture wins. Culture wins you games. And no matter what level, no matter what sport, if you have a set standard and people want to be doing something specific for that university or for that program to win, I think that's special. When people feel like they belong, that's special. I think programs that have issues, it starts from the ground up or top down, whatever way you want to look at it. But I think culture will win or lose you games, and there is no way around it. But my culture and your culture could look differently, and that doesn't mean one is better than the other. There are certainly some programs that do have better culture, and there's just no way around it. But we all see the game different. We all see life different, and that's okay. Like, you and I have grown up in different parts of the world. We have different tastes in movies and music. But what we both share is a love for each other in this program and how we can go from zero to hero.
Yeah. But you mentioned the culture thing, and like you said, that's an important piece. Winning or how we recover from losses is all a matter of that culture. But I'm going to talk a little bit about like that family thing you mentioned, right? Like you said, it's cliche, and that's kind of it kind of sparked something. Never really had this thought, at least maybe not in the podcast, or maybe after hearing the cliche thing, which I know it is cliche. Like, yeah, like even I said that earlier. I'm like, yeah, the girl said it's a family, right? It is. But it's true, not everybody fits this family, right? Like, you're gonna find yourself a family, and when it comes to as a prospect or as a recruit, after talking to you, after seeing you, like, it's nothing personal, but I just don't think you're gonna fit this culture, right? I don't think you're gonna fit what we have going on here. And like, it is cliche, but at the same time, like, the family that we have built here is important, and so we want the athletes to come fit what we have. We want athletes to come fit our family, right? And so, like, it is cliche, true, but it's also not built off of bringing in bad. And I say, you hear these, like, maybe these bad seeds or bad, toxic people or red flags, whatever. Like, that's fair, but maybe you see that person as a red flag and somebody else doesn't, right? And so, like, they fit that family, but they just don't fit yours. So I don't know, maybe that's my own perspective on that, but, like, yeah, it is cliche, but I don't know why that sparked in my head. But family is something that you feel, you have your culture, you have your chemistry, and the girls have it, and so, like, what's gonna fit, what's not. And so, like, it is true, it's a family thing, but, like, they just don't fit your family. So it is cliche, but they'll find themselves a way. So I don't know why I thought that, but
yeah, I think that's good. And, like, and that's what's great about the portal. That is what's awesome about the transfer portal. And we had a couple student athletes decide that maybe this wasn't the right program for them, and they are very happy where they are now, and I'm very happy for them. And that's what's great about the portal. We recruit student athletes that maybe didn't love their family before. That sounds terrible. I didn't mean it like that, but maybe it wasn't the right family for them.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what's great. And honestly, like, we all have interesting opinions about it, but I'm a big portal proponent. I think things need to change. Do I have the answers? No. But I'm a big proponent of giving kids the right opportunity at the right place.
They only get 4 years to compete, so helping them make sure that they get the opportunity is there. But like you said, there are some things, and so that'll be a topic for another day for sure. I'm sure if we ever get you back on here, I might throw a little bit more of that portal talk on there for you. But so the other part of this, though, I guess referencing, I mentioned before I asked the last question, is that you found success, but like, how do you build a successful program on the level of wins, and then, like, how do you sustain that over time? Like, it's hard to, for some programs it's easy, some programs it's hard, right? But, like, how do you see yourself not only maintaining 18-12, because like you said, that was your record, but how do you now grow to 20-10 or 25 and whatever that number is, 25-7? Like, how do you 25-5, whatever it is, right? Like, how do you? I don't know. I'm not a math guy. Okay, I tell the girls all the time, they're especially recruits, I'll help you out with anything, history, writing, like, especially those geography. Like, I'm your guy. But you talk about math, I'm gonna send you to the tutoring center, because that ain't me, right? So, like, I don't know why that's not that hard of a math. It's 7. So yeah, how do you when it comes to that, like, how do you sustain that and not only maintain it but now grow from it? So on the level of your program, how do you build it, and then how do you sustain it?
If I had the actual answer to that, I think I would be super, super successful, probably be the best. I mean, like, that's probably every coach's question, right? Because then, like, there'd probably be no coaches ever fired. Yeah, I mean, that's the question. That's the golden question, is how do we get better? Gosh, I mean, like, I can talk about what I know, like, my team needs to get better at. There's certain things, certain skills, but how you sustain success and winning is, I mean, you got to find the right kids, and you got to keep adapting and adjusting, right? So, like, for example, I came into this league late, and I think part of the reason why we had so much success is, like, I don't think coaches knew how to play against our system. Like I'm different than the previous Queens coach, and I'm different than how they do stuff. And so, what I think I do really well as a coach is I see the puzzle pieces and then try and figure out how to put them together, right? And sometimes those puzzle pieces are, break off with an injury or something goes wrong, and it's just trying to, how can I reform a different puzzle piece? Or maybe Legos is a better way. You think that you're building a tower, and then all of a sudden you're building a dragon because you lost a couple pieces or pieces adjust, but that dragon could also be really cool. And then all of a sudden you're building, I don't know, like a tree. It's sometimes you don't know what the picture looks like until you get it. And we talked about like having the plan. Sometimes the plan is awesome until it's not. But honestly, like, yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but at the end of the day, I can only do the best thing I can do, and it's trust my gut. And it's if it's working, great. If we need to adjust, great. But it goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier. Like, the girls know that they can trust me on what I'm doing, and part of it's I need to trust myself, and like, sometimes I second guess, but I'll be open and honest. Like, I'm like, hey, I just want to try this to see what it looks like. I don't know what it's gonna look like, but is there something here that we could use? Like, is this an okay thing? But I don't know. Like, I wish I had a magical wand to tell you, like, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm gonna win this many games and do all this. But I mean, I could tell you, like, if I do nothing and don't try, I can lose a lot of games. But I think coaches at the end of the day, just they need to just trust themselves. And like this off season, I've watched back every single one of our games multiple times. I've watched back almost every other conference team's games. Like, I just study and study and study and think, like, okay, why do I think they're trying to do this? So that, when I go watch them, I kind of understand each coach's system, so that when I'm prepping for their team, I know kind of what their thought processes are. And so I learned that trick from a couple coaches, and I was like, dang, you knew me super well. And that's why maybe I couldn't ever beat you, is because you knew every little trick that I had up my sleeve. And so I'm like, all right, now I'm gonna remember that this, and I'm gonna pull something out that you're not used to, and try and give my team every advantage I can.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioning, the programming, like, thinking about different things to try and all that, right? Like, you also said, let's just try it to see what it looks like. I feel like as a coach, you also have to develop, not that you don't trust yourself, but like, I've told the girls, like, there was an example, sent this on the podcast before, so the people who are listening, if you guys have heard this part before, I apologize. But, it's one of those things where there was a time of the year where I felt like, we weren't wrestling that well. And I think that at the end of the day comes down to me. So, like, I had to change our programming. I changed how we trained, how we practiced, and some of the things that we did, and it helped, right? And so, like, as a coach, also understanding, like, we want to see things and see what it's like, but we also have to know when to not abort the mission, but adjust the mission to make sure we continue up that hill. So that's a great point when it comes to that. So my final question on the philosophical side is my favorite question of the show. It's the name of the podcast. It's what's your coach's why?
It's funny. I've been able to listen to quite a few episodes, and I've always reflected and thought about what my answer is. And honestly, I kind of think I shared a little of it earlier. Like, I have had so many influential coaches for me when I was a student athlete, and whether that be good or bad, I suppose. And honestly, like, I really find joy in helping others succeed and for them chasing their goals. Like, if I can just assist you in being great, like, I feel so good about myself. And I've never understood exactly like why that is. And I think, like, it's very unique to coaches. Like, there's a lot of people that don't understand that feeling, but the people that do, they'll agree that it's just, there's nothing better. And so, and honestly, maybe that's selfish in a way, that I crave that feeling, and that's why I do it. Is I don't know, maybe that is a selfish thing at the end of the day. It's selfish that I'm craving unselfishness, maybe. I don't know. I think that's really cool. I like seeing families impacted, when you can give them a financial aid package that's going to change their family's life and their generational life. that, they might not have ever had someone go to college before. And now like you're paying, a $75,000 scholarship for them to go make something for their future. Oh yeah, dude, let me tell you. But it's so cool. Like, I just, it's really rewarding to see people grow for me.
For sure. Yeah.
And with that being said, I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you how competitive I am and how much I crave winning. Like that feeling of winning, just, oh man, let me tell you. And then at the same time, as weird as this is, I think there would be coaches that understand, like, it's not that I crave losing, but the idea of a loss sometimes kind of excites you, and the idea of like, that's what makes it fun. Because if I knew that I was just going to win every game, then it'd be like, well, this is kind of boring. I mean, it's cool, but it's like, meh. It's fun to have the idea of like, man, this team is going to give us a battle and we might not win, but like, I'm going to have so much fun competing my tail off. And versus like, if you walk into a meet and you know that you're just pinning every single guy or girl, like, it's fun, but really, is it that fun? It's like when you go out and compete, it's like, I know that team can beat me and I'm going to go and prove why I'm better or my team is better.
For sure.
Nothing better than that. Like there were so many teams this year that we beat that we had never even taken a set off of, let alone winning. And I think there was like 6 teams that we made a program first ever win. And it was like, this is really cool. Like I didn't even understand how big of a deal it was until it was. But, no, I think to get back to the philosophical reasons, like, we have such an impact. Like I still to my day think about, I have had so many coaches and I can name them by name and I'll never forget some of the things that they instilled in me. And, there's, I had 2 college coaches and to this day, I still, text back and forth with one of them. And, I mean, that dude is a huge impact on my life and probably more than he will ever know. And he doesn't, I mean, and he would appreciate that. And I probably should tell him that, but I know that there are a lot of people out there like me that feel that way about coaches. And so I just hope that my student athletes, whether I was their assistant coach, I coached them when they were 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old, whatever it is. If I was their head coach, great. If I had any impacts on them, hopefully for a positive reason,
Right.
like that's all that matters. If I can die a happy man, hopefully when I'm old, knowing that I had a positive impact on society and people around me.
For sure. That's a great why. I appreciate you diving into that. That's a really good why, Coach. So thank you for dumping into that one and explaining, whether it's selfish or not selfish, on the philosophical side, I really appreciate that and everything. And so I have 2 questions kind of on the hot topic side. And we're going to get to those to finish this up, kind of on the fun side of things. But if you guys are still listening to this podcast, if you guys are on YouTube, make sure you guys hit that bell, like, subscribe, all the 9 yards. If you guys are an audio listener, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it is, make sure you guys leave a comment, hit those stars, leave a review, say what you got to say, but say it with your chest because Coach and I want to hear it. The final few questions more on the fun side. I don't know why I even wrote this question down, but maybe it's because you mentioned it earlier and it's probably a hot topic, so we're going to do it anyways. You said earlier that, if you were to get a chance, if you were to coach your team to the Sweet 16, you're going to get coaches calling you. You're going to get programs calling you. Are you going to even entertain that? If you're at that level to where you can take Queens to a Sweet 16, knowing that you found the system a little bit, right, or you found what it takes to get to that point, are you entertaining that? That's super hot question. That might be the hottest question I've ever asked. I used to ask this question to coaches. I was like, hey, like especially JUCO and 2-year D3, D2 NAI coaches. I used to ask them, like, are you trying to get to the next level? And they always answered it respectfully, of course, like, no, I like it, but you've already got to the D1 level. Right now you're mid-major, so the only really step from here is like SEC, Big 10, Big 12, right? So like, are you going to even entertain that knowing that you took Queens to a Sweet 16, Elite 8, whatever it is?
You're going to get me in trouble. Hey, I'm under contract. I'm very happy in my contract. If any administrators are listening, we are not competing in breaking any contract laws, for the record.
For sure.
In a hypothetical world, we're going to answer this question, so that I don't get any in trouble. But yeah, like I'd be lying to tell you that that I don't have hopes and dreams. Like I grew up in Milwaukee, and let me tell you, if Marquette ever were to call, that's a conversation. I'm picking up that phone and having I'd love to hear what they have to say. That's a special place in my heart that will always hold true and dear to me. But here's the thing that I will say, and I think this is good for all coaches to hear. And I think there's a lot of coaches that will know this too. Like, the grass isn't always greener. Like, whether it's, hey, I could make an extra $5,000, or I'm going to have this if I go there. Every place you go to has its problems, man. And there's good people and people that you wish weren't maybe there at every place you go. Queens took a chance on me, and I will always be forever grateful. And for me, I'm a very loyal person to a fault, probably. And so, there will always be places or people that can get a hold of me if they want, but once you build a program up, it's pretty hard when you're excited about continue to win and do all that. So no, I think I think every coach in America is lying to you if they say I'm never leaving, because we all have maybe something in my head that's going on, whether it's money, a program, location. But I'm a big proponent of being happy and being grounded at the same time.
I appreciate you even answering that question, because I realized as soon as you started that, I was like, dang, I don't know why I asked this question, because this may not be the smartest question to ask. But I do appreciate you answering that. I do think you're right, though. Like, I think admin know, no matter where you are, that there's always going to be a chance, especially in today's world of college athletics. Like, if Alabama called you, Nebraska calls, right? It doesn't have to be you. Like, if you're a mid-major football coach and, a big SEC school calls you, like, how are you not at least listening to that, right? Like, it doesn't mean you're going to take it, but it might be one of those things where you entertain the phone call just because you never know, right? And so, like, I think of it, maybe it's just me, but, like, I think of, like, being a coach, I don't know if you ever played, like, college, like any college sports in terms of, like on the video games growing up. Like, I used to play college football all the time, on Xbox. I always took the worst school I could find and build it to be a powerhouse, right? 5-star, we're getting 5-star recruits, we're beating Bama, like we build a dynasty, right? Literally. And so, like, in my head, I think about that as a coach now. I'm like it's, once you build that dynasty, like, it's hard to want to leave it, right? Like, it's hard to want to do that. And I think it's also hard to, I guess, kind of leave what you built, right? Because, this legacy's here, you enjoy it, whatever the case is. So, like, I think it's hard. I think of it like that. Like, my goal is to be, there's a school called, Penn State, in terms of, like, the school, but the wrestling program, they just won their 14th straight, or 14th out of the last 16 national championships on the wrestling side, right? It's like a literal dynasty, debatably one of the best in any sports in history. He's never leaving that job because he's already got that, right? He's not going to leave that. And so, like, that's what I want to do here, right? Like, I want to build a powerhouse here at this 2-year level. And I'm sure the guy, because, at the JUCO level, there's a school up in Iowa, I think Indian Hills, I think they're in Iowa, but they've won 6 straight on the women's side. And so it's like, I'm sure he's gotten phone calls, but, like, he hasn't left yet, right? I appreciate you answering that, because you're right. You could be there for forever, even if you do win, right, and you do get to that level. It's not that you choose to leave it. It's just, it's entertaining. So I appreciate you even answering that question. I apologize, but that's a very, very well answered question there. So
yeah, and if this is played 10 years from now and I'm working and Marquette's our biggest rival, this better not be clipped by anyone in the chat and played. Like, this is not locker room billboard kind of stuff. For the record, it was hypothetical.
I got you. Just so you know, I'll put it in my phone in my notes. I'm gonna check 10 years later from now. I'll be 40 in 10 years. So when I'm 40, that's gonna be my what is it? Midlife crisis age. I'm gonna check midlife crisis as I'm going through everything. I'm gonna be like, damn, what is Coach doing up there? Is he still at Queens? So I got you. And if it is the case, I won't even bring it up. I'm just gonna send it to you privately. I'm just gonna clip it and send it to your phone.
There you go.
Yeah. Just so no one has it. So, final question I have for you tonight is: what state produces the best high school volleyball?
Ooh, what state produces the best high school volleyball? There's probably only a couple that are even legitimate to bring up. I mean, the number one, and it would be a hard argument against, is probably Texas. And I'll say this: I have a couple Texas girls up our sleeves, so I'm gonna definitely say Texas, so they don't get too mad at me. My assistant coach also big Texas girl, played at SMU, so if she hears this, then she'd be pissed at me if I didn't say Texas. I think some of the other ones that are really big, Georgia has produced probably the next great volleyball player. She's 16 years old, and she's already gotten USA college invites. Like, she literally was training, maybe she's even 14. I don't even think she's 16. She's 14, actually. And she's training with college girls at the USA gym. Like, that's the next greatest volleyball player out of Georgia. Florida produces a lot of really good talent, so that Southeast region is pretty darn good. I think I'm going to go with those three states, and probably I'm going to go in that order: Texas, Georgia, Florida, and then I'm going to give an honorable mention to Illinois, because Illinois produces often some of the number one recruits in the country. So maybe maybe Illinois creeps into that list, but it has to be those four, and I don't even think it's debatable after those four.
Okay, all right. Well, I respect that. Okay, yeah. I'd actually graduated with a girl who actually played volleyball at SMU as well, actually out of New Mexico as well. So it's interesting that she went to SMU as well. So that's cool. Well, that's awesome, man. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you jumping on here and talking with me tonight. This is actually, I think, this is my longest episode I've ever done. I think my longest one before this was like 142, and so we're almost at 2. So like, not in a bad way. This was a really good one. I appreciate the conversation. I thought it was a really, really good one. There are a lot of gems in there, honestly, guys. If you guys didn't take anything from this one, then I don't know what you're doing. I wrote down a whole bunch of stuff here. So long story short, I really appreciate you jumping on here and talking with me today, because this was a really good episode. So I appreciate you, Coach.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And again, like, if any of your listeners, like, follow me on Instagram, if you ever want to talk, email me. My job is obviously coaching volleyball, but as you can tell, like, I really care about people, and I want to see people succeed. And there's so many influential people in my life that were coaches. Like, I whether you're a volleyball coach, wrestling coach, whatever it might be, if I can ever help anyone, don't be afraid to hit me up. I'm always here to help.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll tag his just like always, guys. If you guys don't ever look at descriptions, hopefully you do, but if you don't, I always tag the coach in the description, or at least the program. So check the description box below. YouTube or audio listener, check the description box, and I'll have the coach or coach's social media, whatever it may be, and so we'll do that. But Coach, I really appreciate jumping on here again. I really do. I think that I would love to have you back on here again. Maybe talk more X's and O's, right? Maybe we could talk again at the same time, maybe next year or something like that, right? Just kind of stay in the loop and see how year 2 goes for you, and see kind of how things are looking. So, I mean, if you're up for it, I'd love to have you back on. And the second one, a little bit more on the schematic side, a little bit more on like the coaching, I guess more on the volleyball side, a little bit more in tune with that. So if you're down for that, I'd love to have you back on at one point.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that sounds fun to me. And anytime you need me, you let me know.
Absolutely, man. I will. And thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed this longer one. So if you guys haven't, make sure you guys already told that. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I almost fumbled that outro there. Whatever. I don't fumble. I've only fumbled on a few episodes. So shout out to you, I guess. I don't know. I guess I'll fumble on this one too. But with that being said, guys, thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.